to find the link, but hopefully they'll trickle in. Maybe we just get going so we stay on time.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll give you the 20 seconds and then I'll start the intro. All right. Does it look like it's working?
One moment.
Okay.
Yes, we're good.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, Facebook or on Zoom. I'm Nicholas Barber. I'm a PhD student here in the department. Most of you probably know me, but for those who don't, nice to meet you. Today, I'm just going to be giving a brief introduction before Dr. Chief takes the floor. I want to start off by reminding everyone and introducing to anyone who hasn't been joined us for this seminar series before, the goal of the seminar series, Geoscience in Context. Overall, our hope is that this seminar series highlighting the research of people across a wide spectrum beyond sort of the usual research that we engage with in the department. We want to broaden our department's understanding of geoscience's place in society. And as you'll see, Dr. Chief's research is very much grounded in that type of that approach. So very much in line with the aim of the seminar series overall. I also want to briefly mention, and I'm actually, for anyone who's in the Zoom call, I'm going to drop in the chat for anyone who hasn't joined us before, our code of conduct. In this document, you can see the Google Doc here just to review, but this is a code of conduct that we, every time we have a seminar, have this seminar series, we encourage people to review and remind you that by taking part in this seminar series, you are agreeing to the terms of this code of conduct, which essentially just ask you to be respectful of other people's views and people's identities. So we just want to make this an inclusive environment and a place where we can have thought-provoking and productive conversations. So have a look over that if you'd like. And now with some of the logistics out of the way, I'm going to now introduce our speaker. So today we have Dr. Karletta Chief, who is an associate professor and extension specialist in the Department of Environmental Science at the University of Arizona in Tucson, Arizona. Dr. Chief received a bachelor's and a master's degree in civil and environmental engineering from Stanford University in 1998, and a PhD in hydrology, slip of the tongue, and water resources from University of Arizona in 2007. Broadly, Dr. Chief's research goals are to improve our understanding and tools and predictions of watershed hydrology, unsaturated flow and arid environments, and how natural and human disturbances affect soil hydrology through the use of physically based methods. Dr. Chief's research also focuses on how indigenous communities will be affected by climate change, and she collaborates as part of an interdisciplinary group of scientists, including hydrologists, dynamic modelers, and soil scientists, to determine how hydrologic models can be improved to identify and mitigate risks to these vulnerable populations. So she's also a recipient of numerous awards within her field, which I think is worth highlighting. So without further ado, Dr. Chief's talk today is titled Unique Climate Change Impacts on Water Resources of American Indians and Alaska Natives in the US. So Dr. Chief, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nick, for having me here, and thank you to the department for inviting me here to speak, especially being across the oceans. It's a real honor for me to be invited. Hopefully in the future I can visit. I've never been to Europe before. So first I want to introduce myself in my own language. Adona shinigi a torch ni shla to hana bashishin. There's a planet that should che do tachini a dashinala akut a sanenchla. So what I just shared with you is my identity as an indigenous woman. I'm from the Navajo Nation. We call ourselves Dene. And I am the Bitterwater clan, born for Near the Water clan. My maternal grandfather is the Red House clan, and my paternal grandfather is Red Running to the Water. So as you can see, 3 of my clans are water-based. And so that's an example of how important water is to me and to many indigenous people. To Native Americans, water is sacred and it's tradition. In contrast to the non-utilitarian views of water, Native Americans revere water, and water is life. Water is used in sacred purification rituals, religious and cultural ceremonies, and family blessings to acknowledge all our relations, just as I did this evening on your end, to recognize our connection to Mother Earth, Father Sky, and the ocean. Water is not viewed in singularity as we do as Western scientists with our specialties in marine or limnology or atmospheric hydrology or hydrogeology. But for the indigenous people, water is viewed holistically as an integrating component of the whole system, connecting continents, plants, humans in the continuous cycle of liquid, solid, and vapor states. Water gives life. Just as we were conceived in water, born in water, will return to water, the water world upon death. My people, the Navajo people, we believe in the balance of life and water, which we call hojon. I want to give you an example of that balance and the way that we view the world. For example, we have two different types of rain. There's a male rain and a female rain. Male rain is typical like of the monsoon rains where the intensity is much greater and often involves thunder and lightning. Female rain is more the gentle showers experienced in the winter. So together, these are two different types of rain, and together the Navajo people that believe that it provides balance on Mother Earth to provide life. So like many other tribes in the United States, Navajos and other indigenous peoples have clans and identities that are based on water, and they acknowledge it as their identity. Climate variability and change are likely to result in increased temperatures, changes in precipitation regimes, and increases in extreme events. These changes are altering regional hydrology in terms of the quantity, quality, and timing in many ways, such as permafrost thawing and earlier snowmelt. Changes in climatic and hydrologic parameters will lead to ecosystem changes and include habitat loss, altered nutrient cycling, and impacts to species, such as a shift in geographic ranges and population change. These types of changes constitute direct hazards to which Native Americans in the United States are exposed. This warming trend will affect tribal and non-tribal people. However, tribes across the United States will face unique climate change impacts. Native Americans in the US originate from diverse indigenous groups, each with a unique and rich history, culture, language, and identity. Today, there are 574 federally recognized tribes with over 5 million tribal members across 33 states. In addition to those that are federally recognized by the US government, there are also tribes that are state recognized. And there are even more tribes that are not recognized by the United States government. While majority of Native Americans live on non-tribal lands, we'll focus my talk today on those that live on tribal lands. Tribal resources include rivers, lakes, wetlands, springs, groundwater, permafrost, snowpack, glaciers, estuaries, oceans, and sea ice. Because there are so many diverse indigenous tribes across the United States, we categorize them into impacts in these 6 regions shown in the blue outline. These regions are grouped as Alaska, Pacific Northwest, Southwest, Great Plains, Midwest, and the East. what we did was we placed the context of impacts of climate change into a hazard and disaster risk reduction framework that is set in the medicine wheel, specifically to emphasize the interconnectedness of the factors constraining or enabling response to these climate change hazards. These factors are socioeconomic, political, infrastructural, environmental, and spiritual and cultural values. Vulnerability and adaptive capacity are functions of human and environmental factors and exposure to climate hazards. So these factors are important to consider the response and the ability to adapt. First, I want to talk about socioeconomic factors. Factors such as community structure and rural and urban composition are recognized as components of social vulnerability. Similar to indigenous peoples around the world in developing and developed countries, Native Americans on tribal lands often live in rural communities with smaller populations under lower socioeconomic conditions and frequently experience greater political marginalizations than the non-indigenous counterparts. These economic conditions affect the way that tribes manage their water and also their ability to respond to climate change impacts on their water. Secondly is political. Federally recognized tribes are sovereign nations. And so they have a federal to federal, government to government relationships with the United States government. Also, tribes have fixed tribal boundaries and often are a remnant of their original traditional homelands. As a result, they often have off-reservation sustenance rights, as well as federally reserved water rights because of their establishment date based on when their reservation was created. But in addition, they're also impacted by off-reservation activities, such as pollutions and impacts from non-tribal users. And they're often underrepresented in the greater watershed in terms of how water is managed. So these political factors are important to consider in looking at the environmental and climate change impacts, because it's not just environmental, it's also mixed with legal complex issues. Third is infrastructure. Tribal infrastructure may not be designed to accommodate the impacts of climate change, resulting in the deterioration of physical structures and decreasing effectiveness. For example, the ability to treat water to a specified standard may not be achievable because the water treatment plant could be designed for different capacity. And with changing water quality as a result of climate change, that can tax the water facility. So it can lead to the service disruption, which would result in economic and public health consequences. So generally, poor economic conditions on tribal lands may mean that infrastructure is lacking or inadequate or poorly maintained, thus increasing the tribal vulnerability to flooding, drought, and waterborne diseases. Infrastructure damage can also increase the cost of providing water, which can quickly drain the tribal finances. But even without these climate change impacts, Native Americans already face infrastructure challenges, which has even been more amplified now with the COVID-19 pandemic, where approximately 12% of Native American homes lack safe and adequate supplies and or have waste disposal facilities. This is very large compared to less than 1% of the US. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, we're asked to wash our hands for at least 20 seconds. But if you don't have ready water and if you're conserving water, that is no easy task. In Alaska and the Navajo Nation, anywhere from 13% to 35% of the people have to haul water. And these water haulers are even more susceptible to waterborne diseases, especially if they obtain the water from a non-potable source, such as livestock wells, or if they're using unsanitary hauling methods. Because climate change can lead to ecosystem changes, climate change affects the ecosystem services, which are really important to Native Americans for subsistence and cultural activities. For example, fishing, ranching, gathering medicinal plants and herbal plants. And in addition, another important ecosystem service provided by groundwater is that groundwater supplies 93% of the water supply for Native Americans, and 66% for Alaskan Native waters. So in addition to climate change impacts, depressed economic conditions, fixed marginal lands, urbanization, land use changes, and invasive species are stressing this ecosystem health today. So that's why it's important to consider this factor of ecosystem services and land use factor. The final factor is spiritual and cultural. And I started out the seminar identifying myself and laying the context of how Native Americans are deeply connected to the natural world through their culturehood, their religion, their livelihoods, their values. But they're also very observant of their environment for history, through history. They're keepers of complex and extensive bodies of ecological and societal knowledge that are passed down through generations, and they still are being passed down through oral songs and tradition, through ceremonies. And so the strong connection to the natural environment it lends to why they are very dedicated to protecting their environment. And the impacts of climate change will impact their ability to maintain their cultural and spiritual livelihoods. For example, there are sacred springs in the mountains that have been used for ceremonies, and climate change is decreasing and drying up these springs. There are tribes that have all their ceremonies are based on water. So with decreasing the water and availability of the water, it's unclear how these ceremonies will continue. But this ecological knowledge contributes to human cultural diversity as a rich repository of data and observation that can help the tribes adapt to climate change. And this knowledge is important, especially in areas where data is lacking in monitoring hydrology and the environment. So it really does help to contribute to the future adaptive capacity of Native Americans. I now want to talk about regional examples across the United States. First, starting with Alaska. So Alaska is 1/3 the size of the continental US, and it's home to 227 federally recognized Alaska Native villages and communities. Most of the villages are small and isolated and along the coast, and many residents engage in traditional subsistence hunting, such as hunting for walrus and caribou, or fishing, such as fishing for salmon. They are located in an area with abundant water resources, and they're very dependent on it. But much of the water is frozen and locked up in glaciers and frozen ground. However, in Alaska and in the Arctic, they're experiencing some of the most profound warming in the world. And this impact of warming is impacting subsistence activities, creating coastal and riverine erosion, and impacting the water supply, such as impacting the source water and impacting the water infrastructure. For Alaskan natives, their life revolves around hunting of sea mammals such as seals and whales, and the sea ice plays an important role. Thinner ice and unusual cracks can create hazardous conditions leading to injuries and equipment loss. Timing and shifts in the sea ice freezing and thawing is altering the hunting patterns. Also, the Alaska natives store their food in underground cellars, and that's becoming less reliable. Storm surges are also creating coastal erosion that for some communities, like showed here in Kivalina, they're being forced to relocate because their homes are being inundated by the rising ocean. So the climate change in Alaska is happening now, and the impacts and the adaptation of Alaskan Native is present day. So we've been learning from them and using their example to share with other Native Americans in the US about encouraging them about planning and adapting for climate change. The second one is the Pacific Northwest. There are 42 tribes here, and most of the precipitation is stored in the mountain snowpack and released in the spring with snowmelt. And this supplies one of the most important species to many of the tribes there, which is salmon. Salmon's a cultural keystone species, and it's not only important for food, but also for economic sources for many of the tribes. So the salmon is dependent on the cold water, and their life cycle starts in fresh headwater streams as eggs, and then they travel to lower river estuaries and acclimate to salt water. But with the warming temperatures and the warming waters, that indicator for the salmon has been halted and has been delayed. So this inability of the salmon to go and migrate has also impacted the tribal salmon hatcheries and their efforts to reintroduce salmon, the riparian restoration. And so for the Pacific Northwest, it's really a cultural and economic impact. In addition, for the tribes that live along the coast, they are also experiencing coastal erosion that's also impacting shellfish and impacting the habitats. And so the tribes are doing mitigation plans to respond to that. I want to provide some more examples of this here in this slide. The Swinomish tribe in Washington, they rely on shellfish for staples of food and culture. And the rising sea level has made a big impact on the critical habitat for shellfish and salmon. In addition, the ocean acidification can disrupt the calcification process in the shell development. Now I want to move to the Southwest, which is actually where I live. We have 170 tribes in the Southwest, and they engage in various economic activities like ranching, agriculture, mining, tourism. And one of the major impacts is drought and flooding that has impacted these economies. And they also threaten the tribes, causing them to use marginalized resources. So drought has been a real challenge for many of the tribes. For example, reduced soil moisture has caused increases of sand dune that has inundated homes, and also forest fires with the Apache nations, flooding for the Wallapai tribe, where they had to close down their tourism, and then inability to ranch and to farm due to severe droughts. In the Great Plains, there are 70 tribes, and these tribes are predominantly on grasslands, and their unique cultural species is bison. And the Great Plains tribes, they also engage in agriculture, ranching, tourism, energy extraction, and renewable energy production. And again, they have been impacted by climate change. For example, in North Dakota, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, they depend on a sole intake pipe from the Missouri River at Fort Yates for its water supply. And a drought in 2003 caused water levels to fall so low that silt and sludge clogged the pipe. The tribe didn't have water for several days, and a hospital had to temporarily shut down. In 2011, in Oklahoma and Texas, there was a historic drought and heat wave. And the tribe couldn't provide enough food to sustain their cattle and their livestock. And because of the drying ponds, the farmers had to sell their livestock prematurely, and it depressed the markets and resulted in accelerated sell-off. So there are many direct impacts to the tribes, and it's important to consider how the tribe can respond when these types of extreme events occur, such as flooding and drought. In the Great Lakes, there are 30 tribes, and they depend primarily on freshwater systems. For the Midwest tribes, they focus their subsistence activities on fishing, gathering water-based plants, and they also grow wild rice, which they call menominee. And this is a sacred food. And the ability of them to grow that rice was impacted with flooding. But I consider the Midwest tribes as also leaders in addressing climate change. In 2004, the Midwestern tribes, they created an intergovernmental accord between the tribes of Michigan and the governor of the state of Michigan concerning the protection of shared water resources. And so biannual meetings are held between the state and the tribes to discuss the responsibilities and potential cooperative efforts. And as a result of this, they've been able to have more voice in impacts of climate change and work to protecting their subsistence activities. The final region is in the East, and 27 tribes live in the East. The key impacts that have been impacting them is impacts to fishery habitat by flooding, scouring of fishing habitat and nesting sites, and increasing fish mortality. Coastal tribes depend on shellfish harvesting and fishing, similar to the Pacific Northwest tribes. And so they have been struggling because of the impacts to their subsistence. Tribes in Louisiana also are impacted by land loss because their land is being inundated. They're actually climate refugees. And so for the Louisiana tribes, they have been working with the US government to relocate because of the loss of land. Now I want to give an example of a tribe that I've been working with for over 10 years. It's the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe. The Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe is located in northern Nevada, and they call themselves the Kui Kado, or Kui eaters. And that reflects their deep connection to this fish, Kui, which is an endangered fish. They also have lahao cutthroat trout in the lake. So the lake, Pyramid Lake, is important to those species. The lake is at the very end of the Truckee River system. And so they're impacted by all the upstream activities. And the lake is a terminal lake. So it makes the impacts even greater. So since the dams have been built by the Bureau of Reclamation, the lake levels have declined drastically, impacting the fish. But the tribe has been working within the watershed to try to regain the lake levels to protect the fish. But now we have climate change now on top of those existing upstream impacts. So I worked with the tribe to do one of the very first climate change studies. And we surveyed the tribe to ask them what they thought about climate change. What do they see as priority for the government to take action, for the state and local, and ask them about their perceptions. And so 80% said they were aware climate change is happening and that they observed the changes in their environment. 73% believed in climate change and that humans were playing a role in it. 93% expressed their priority for climate change action at the national level. We also did surveys with other stakeholders in Nevada that were non-tribal, including non-tribal ranchers. And when you compare the two, it was very different. The tribe was also very aware of their environment and how it's been changing as a result of climate change. For example, 72% of individuals surveyed said that they have observed decreases in surface water, as well as increases in summer temperature, changes in the fish community, decrease in snowpacks, and decreases in the spring water. Using a holistic approach to work with the community to identify their needs and priorities, we have worked to integrate traditional community knowledge with scientific data. It is collaborative and directed by the community. We use our expertise to understand the local resources, water resources and systems, and then determine existing and needed knowledge to communicate that to the community. Then we use climate change scenarios to work with the community to develop future water management plans. Our priority is to be transparent to the tribe and the community through data collection, writing, and reporting. So designed within a framework of this ongoing collaboration with the Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribal Council, our goal was to develop community outreach strategies for the tribe that can help stimulate discussion on climate change, engage the departments and stakeholder groups to talk about climate change and vulnerability, and then to identify ways that the tribe can adapt and how Indigenous knowledge can be integrated to assist the tribe in developing their adaptation plan. So our goal was to use a decolonized method that was based on participatory action and to engage the community's perspectives about climate change. Through that, the tribe identified categories of key problems on the tribal land, and also what initiatives could be used to manage and address these impacts. Another thing we did was we used a very simple water balance model to as a tool with the community members, where they can discuss different scenarios where we can change the flow, change in temperature, change in precipitation, and see hypothetically what the lake levels could be into the future. And this would be a tool to provide a discussion and engagement with the community. So as hydrologists, we develop a cognitive map based on the literature about what climate change impacts could do for the lake. For example, increasing salinity, that will impact the native fish's ability to spawn. And so we presented that to the community, and then they, in this dialogue, they're sitting around here, the key tribal environmental leaders, they added to it and refined that cognitive map so that it was specific to them and really highlighted what was important to them. For example, they identified that the climate change impacts will provide less water in upstream reservoirs and will lead to less purchase of agricultural water rights. And so this process was really important for us to really have the community be engaged and lead that discussion and make that discussion their own. In all this work, we're talking about traditional knowledge, but traditional knowledge is not freely available. It's a very sensitive topic, and I was part of a working group that provided guidelines to how to ethically engage in using traditional knowledge with the tribe, because traditional knowledge may not always be desired by the tribe to be publicly available. It's important to work with the tribes and protect their data sovereignty and their traditional knowledge so that it doesn't, it's not misused. So some of the other educational tools that we developed with the tribe, which is now being used at the museum, is a better understanding of the impacts of climate change on the fish within the Pyramid Lake. And through this, we developed a video and it's used to engage not only tribal citizens, but also K through 12 tribal students to talk about climate change and motivate them to think about going to college and or being involved in climate action. So in conclusion, tribes, they have an urgent need to prepare and respond to climate change, and to do so in a way that is holistic and considers cultural and traditional values. Uncertainties in predicting these impacts must be recognized because there is uncertainty in model projections, and there's often lack of community-specific data. And so in that way, it's important to engage the community. And all of these uncertainties work together, and that must be recognized. Adaptation strategies must be effective, and it's most effective if it's integrated into the existing plans that the tribe has, so that it is a living action and it's living policy within their environmental management. And for many Native Americans who have often been left out of discussion, it is important that adaptation be participatory and transparent. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you today. And I would love to take any questions. And I also want to recognize all the many collaborators that I was involved in, because this is a very large assessment to look at all tribes across the United States. Thank you.